Activity is the only road to knowledge. Knowledge is of no value unless you put it into practice.
I try to explain, but you don't see. No one can give you more love than me. You say you're waiting for just the right one. You'll try to find me when he lets you down. When you find out.
Hello everyone, I'm Trevor, and welcome back to the Knowledge Management e-learning video series, prepared for the Philippine Red Cross. This video is going to focus on applying knowledge management through outreach strategies, especially regarding communications and messaging. The first goal of this video is to encourage you to think about how you can apply the knowledge you have to help your organization achieve its goals. The second is to encourage you to think of ways to help boost the retention rate of RC143 volunteers, because this is a key objective of the Bravo project. And so many of the examples in this video will be focused on volunteers. So, what is communication? Why do we communicate? At its heart, communication is the sharing of information and knowledge between different persons. Communications would typically be considered a separate field from knowledge management, but I'd like to combine them for this e-learning. Communication plays a role in almost everything that we do in our professional, personal, and volunteer lives. This can take many forms, from emails with NHQ or an order for a burger steak at Jollibee. Even though it sounds funny, it is applicable. The cashier, in asking you what you would like to order, is seeking information from you that they will use to directly benefit their business as well as meet in need of you, the customer. It is little different from how blood services staff use their knowledge to better serve those who need blood from the Philippine Red Cross. So, if communication is so vital at every level of an organization, how can knowledge management help you improve it? Most of what we have learned so far have been things intended to strengthen your chapter internally, such as knowledge management leadership and culture, and lessons learned processes. This module will be different because it will focus on how knowledge management can help your chapter extend itself and become more effective and more recognized in your province of the Philippines. One of the knowledge gifts that the Philippine Red Cross is blessed with is a trove of information on people throughout the country. Each chapter collects information through blood services, Maab sales, Red Cross youth and volunteers, and from special projects, surveys. I'm not sure whether or not you already realize it, but this information being collected can be powerful. Organizations in North America now even charge other organizations to use these similar lists for fundraising. But to make this information powerful, you need to operationalize it in a communication strategy. The first step in having a communication strategy is identifying a need for and deciding whether you actually want to have a communication strategy. My knowledge management survey of Red Cross chapter staff and volunteers showed that most of us believe that we should be regularly communicating with RC143 volunteers. Every single respondent, all 100%, believe that more regularly communicating with RC143 volunteers will help benefit their retention rates. So, I hope the answer is yes, you do want to have a communication strategy. The first thing you should do is take an objective look at what you are currently doing and how well it is working. Do you communicate on one platform or multiple platforms? Do you post lots but have few followers? Do you have many followers who rarely hear anything from you? I know they say you shouldn't compare yourself with others, but when it comes to communication outreach, I actually do think you should. Do a competitor analysis and see what your competitors are doing. Of course, the Philippine Red Cross is not competing against other organizations, but is competing with them to effectively mobilize and assist more people. And deploying an effective communication strategy is one of the best ways to mobilize a community and share with them the knowledge of the work you are doing and the ways they can receive help when they are needed. I'd like to show you the Action Tabang PDRMO CAPI's Facebook page. See how they regularly update it with photos and videos? They update this page every day, showing them responding to incidents, running exercises, and including content such as dangerous weather warnings. The Kaanak Red Cross chapters do this same thing, but not often enough to routinely inform the community of our work or be a reliable source of information for local incidents and disasters. The next thing to decide is how you will communicate with people. Consider the people in your province and barangays. You should use the tools that volunteers and community members are comfortable with for regular communication. Is this mostly text messaging, social media, radio, phone calls, poster campaigns in their barangay? Combining communication across multiple platforms and mediums can help you reach the most number of people in your target audience. In my report on knowledge management at the Philippine Red Cross, I'm suggesting using multiple platforms for communications. Did you know that the average age of all of the people in the Philippines is 23.4 years old? And that 67 million Filipinos on Facebook spend an average of 3 hours and 57 minutes per day on social media? These are the young people who make up the Red Cross youth and future Red Cross staff and volunteers. However, there is an age gap. Despite the average age of Filipinos being 23 years old, 96% of RC-143 volunteers in the Kaanak barangays are over the age of 25, and 83% are over the age of 35. Not that being 35 or older makes you a Lolo, but many of these RC-143 volunteers are unlikely to have social media. This is why having a combined communication strategy that uses new media such as Facebook and Instagram, as well as more old school communication like text messaging, a hotline phone number, and radio, will help you get the most out of your communications. Remember that the goal of mass communication with RC-143 volunteers is to make them more effective in helping the chapter to achieve its goals. Directly communicating with these volunteers is best for several reasons, because it gets your message directly across and increases recognition and loyalty from the volunteer to the Red Cross chapter. Also, consider who should be doing the communicating. There are lots of opportunities and things that you can communicate to volunteers and your wider community, and every person and team at the Red Cross should have an interest in communications. I know each chapter has a communications officer who is responsible for chapter communications, and of course they and your administrator have the final say and should see your messages before they are sent out on behalf of your chapter. However, communications are something that we can all contribute to, and I'm sure your communications officer would appreciate the help. You can even train your volunteers and board members as messengers to expand the reach of your Red Cross communications. Encourage them to become Red Cross brand ambassadors, and this will strengthen the reach and impact of the Philippine Red Cross. So now that we have thought about what platforms and processes we can use for communications, what are we going to say? This part is called messaging, and it has its own distinct field called public relations or PR. The Public Relations Society of America defines PR as the, quote, strategic communication process that builds mutually beneficial relationships between organizations and their publics. This means that messaging is the process of creating a consistent story around a product, person, company, or service. So what would this look like for the Philippine Red Cross? Well, the story that you will tell depends on who your audience for that story will be. Remember that all volunteers are distinct and different groups may relate to the Philippine Red Cross in different ways. There are a few widely diverging strategies that you can try for targeting your audience with messaging, and of course you can come up with your own. The first involves focusing your messages on the volunteers who are least involved. For some barangays, only 10 of their RC-143 volunteers have received any further training after their initial orientation. These volunteers, without further training, likely feel that they have few connections with the Red Cross, and likely see or hear from the Red Cross less often than their more trained colleagues. So maybe it makes sense to communicate with them as a low-cost way to keep them interested in remaining an RC-143 volunteer. The other side of the coin is to focus your messaging strategy on reaching only the volunteers who are already most involved in order to maximize their usefulness to your organization. This has been called the 80-20 rule and is used by an NGO called New York Cares. In this approach, you focus 80% of your messaging on the 20% of volunteers who are most highly engaged to motivate them to become even more involved and leverage them to effectively engage the less connected volunteers. And of course, there are so many strategies that can be used, and you can come up with entirely separate ones depending on the individual needs of your chapter. What strategy would you use for selecting your target audience? Now that we have worked on picking a target audience for our messaging, what type of story do we want to tell them? This is where you will need to be really involved and get creative as a storyteller. So what are some things that we need to consider when we're doing your storytelling or messaging? First, you should set a statement of purpose. What are you trying to accomplish with this messaging campaign? Is it to retain more volunteers, help sell raffle tickets or memberships to raise funds for your chapter, encourage people to donate blood? Because the stories you tell and how you tell them will be different for each. Your objectives can take many other forms, such as promoting, training, and activities, explaining and updating on chapter activities, engaging with RC-143 volunteers regularly, following up with volunteers directly after their service and providing feedback, and of course, thanking volunteers. Once you have clearly set your objective and informed everyone on your team what that objective is, you can move on to considering how to tell it. All people are distinct, and different groups have different impressions of and relate to the Philippine Red Cross in different ways. Your messaging should be inclusive and should try to make people identify themselves with the Red Cross or tap into their personal sentiments by showing them how the Red Cross helps their community. Remember that your audience's perspective will change over time, and they will want more sophisticated messaging as they become more familiar with the Red Cross. Make a commitment to clear, consistent communication, and if your audience becomes used to hearing this from you, they will be more likely to wholeheartedly provide their support to the Philippine Red Cross when you need it. This is something that you will ultimately know how to do better than I will because of your deeper understanding of your provinces and their languages. My main tips will be to use lots of imagery and make it personal to your audience by tapping into their memories of when the Red Cross helped their communities after a disaster or a family member needed blood. Remember that the Philippine Red Cross is not part of the government but counts on support from individuals, and tell this to your audience. Tailor or modify your messages to be more specific to your audiences. Even things that come from NHQ can sometimes be changed for your audience and specific barangays. Remember that a road safety communications lecture in a barangay should look very different from road safety communications in Manila, because the cars and traffic conditions are totally opposite. Once you have your messaging, you will be ready for your outreach. The more you practice outreach, the better you become at it, and the more powerful it will become for your chapter. Imagine sending out mass text messages to RC143 volunteers in a barangay for the first time, asking them to show up at a dengue training session in 2 days. Maybe the response rate will not be good because the Philippine Red Cross chapters rarely contact individual volunteers, and some volunteers may have changed their phone numbers, and some volunteers simply may not believe that the Philippine Red Cross is messaging them because this has never happened before. But maybe some volunteers show up and they are able to add missing phone numbers or update RC143 volunteers that were not at the training. Now you can take this updated data, revise your existing information on RC143 volunteers in this barangay, and the next time you message volunteers, they are more likely to respond. Best of all is that it involves all RC143 volunteers and creates a direct link between them and the chapter. And this makes it more likely that they will attend future trainings or assist you when you need it most. I'd like to give an example to tie some things together. Remember back in the lessons learned video when we talked about the importance of discussing what went well and what did not, and why this is important? In short, giving and receiving feedback with your team. Well, this can be another great process that can be shared with your RC143 volunteers. In fact, this was an issue that was commonly identified during the Cuso baseline survey of RC143 volunteers. When asked, quote, "Do you receive enough support and feedback while volunteering?" unquote, a full 74% of over 300 volunteer surveys said no, they did not receive enough support and feedback. Luckily, mass communication techniques make this an easy problem to fix. A day after conducting a training session on dengue in a covered barangay, you could send a message like this to your RC143 volunteers in that barangay. Quote, "Thanks to those who came to the dengue info session. We were amazed so many people came. Next time, we will bring a clipboard for the attendance sheet. Let me know if you have any feedback for us," unquote. This message not only recognizes the volunteers, but also shows a process of continuous learning and improvement on your part. In this way, the volunteers and Red Cross are investing more in each other and more likely to remain committed. And of course, we cannot finish this video without referring back to Daniel Coyle's The Culture Code. One of the most important steps in volunteer communications is to thank your volunteers and recognize them for their work. In the Culture Code, Coyle argues that, quote, "overdoing thank yous," unquote, as in providing thanks and appreciation more often than you would think is actually necessary, is a great way that successful groups strengthen their culture and helps with, quote, "igniting cooperative behavior," unquote. You would be amazed at how far a little recognition can go, and sending a simple message now and then to all of your volunteers saying thank you for what you do for the Philippine Red Cross is one of the most important steps to keeping the Red Cross family strong. Check out the readings that I've posted for this module in the Google Classroom. I've attached a communications proposal strategy that I previously did for Kananak, and maybe it can help inspire your own communication strategy. That's all for me now. Thank you so much for watching until the end, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.
We sit in the car outside your house with white. I can feel the heater coming round. I go to